African Tales Hub presents a story of betrayal, destiny, and unforgettable justice.
That morning, the Carter mansion wasn't silent. It was shaking. Every eye in the house was already waiting for her to fall.
Inside that pouch was Victoria Carter's diamond necklace. The necklace security had beneath the folded sweaters in Diana's room. Then you looked at her and said only two words.
The first thing Diana noticed was that rich people loved silence, right up until the moment they needed someone to blame. That morning, the Carter mansion wasn't silent. It was shaking. Voices bounced off marble floors and 12-foot ceilings. High heels struck the polished hallway with enough force to sound like gunshots. A crystal vase trembled on a side table near the grand staircase. Somewhere down the corridor, a door slammed so hard the framed family portraits on the wall shifted crooked. By the time Diana stepped into the center of that chaos, every eye in the house was already waiting for her to fall. The living room looked less like a home and more like a courtroom built for humiliation. Daniel Carter stood near the fireplace in a dark, tailored suit that probably cost more than Diana made in 2 months. He looked like the kind of man magazines called commanding, the kind of man business channels described as respected, disciplined, visionary. But in that moment, there was no vision in his face. Only anger. Only disappointment. Only the cold, exhausted expression of a man who believed he had been made a fool inside his own house. His wife, Victoria Carter, stood a few feet away in a silk robe the color of old wine. One manicured hand pressed dramatically to her chest, the other pointing toward Diana as if she had just caught evil wearing a uniform. "I warned you about her," Victoria said, her voice sharp enough to cut through bone. The room was crowded. 2 house staff members stood near the archway, pretending not to stare while staring harder than anyone. A family friend who had arrived early for brunch sat frozen on the edge of a velvet chair, looking like she regretted every life choice that had brought her there. And near the hallway entrance stood Michael Brooks, the head of security, broad-shouldered and unreadable, holding a small evidence pouch that changed the temperature of the room. Inside that pouch was Victoria Carter's diamond necklace, the necklace that had vanished sometime after midnight. The necklace Victoria had cried over. The necklace security had just found buried beneath folded sweaters in Diana's room. Diana stood still. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not defend herself the way innocent people in movies always did, as if innocence had ever been enough to save anybody. The diamonds in the bag caught the chandelier light and flashed like they were pleased with themselves. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Say something." Diana looked at the evidence pouch, then at Victoria, then at Daniel.
There were moments in life when a person understood with terrifying clarity that no one in the room was interested in truth. Not really. They only wanted a story neat enough to protect their pride. And if that story had to be built on top of her life, then so be it. Victoria stepped closer. "You've been stealing from this house piece by piece, haven't you? Small things first. Little tests, and when you thought nobody was paying attention, you got bold." Diana finally lifted her eyes to her. Victoria's face was composed, but there was something feverish underneath it. Not fear, not yet. More like excitement. The kind cruel people felt when the trap had snapped shut exactly the way they planned it. Diana knew that look. She had seen smaller versions of it before. On women who smiled while insulting cashiers, on men who accused workers of laziness when their coffee order came late, on supervisors who wrote people up not because they had made mistakes, but because they had dared to keep their dignity while being spoken down to. Victoria loved performance, and right now, she was delivering one. Daniel turned toward Michael. "Call the police." One of the maids near the archway inhaled so sharply it sounded painful. Victoria lowered her hand from her chest, and for the first time that morning, she almost smiled. Diana looked at Michael. Then she spoke so calmly that the room had no choice but to listen. "Before you call them," she said, "check who entered my room at 2:17 this morning." Silence dropped like a curtain. Michael didn't move. Victoria's expression changed first. It was tiny. So tiny most people in that room would have missed it. A flicker around the eyes. A pause in the shoulders. But Diana had spent her whole life surviving by noticing what other people overlooked. And what she saw in that instant was not outrage. It was disruption. Daniel turned slowly toward Michael. "Why does that matter?" Diana kept her eyes on Victoria. "Because whoever planted that necklace made one mistake." Nobody breathed. The house itself seemed to lean in. The family friend in the chair set her coffee cup down with shaking hands. Victoria recovered fast. "This is ridiculous." But her voice had lost something. Not power. Precision. Diana heard it. Michael still said nothing. Daniel's gaze sharpened. "Michael?" The security chief finally looked up, and what passed across his face was brief but unmistakable. Not surprise. Not exactly. More like a man who had hoped a certain moment could be postponed, and had just realized it could not. Victoria stepped forward. "She's lying, obviously. She was caught. Now she's trying to create confusion." Diana did not blink. "Then check." Daniel looked from Diana to Michael to Victoria and back again. A storm was building behind his eyes now, but its direction had changed. That was the thing about truth. It did not have to win immediately. It only had to survive long enough to make lies uncomfortable. "Michael," Daniel said, quieter this time, "is there footage?" Michael hesitated. And in that hesitation, the room changed sides without meaning to. Victoria heard it happen too. It was in the shift of bodies, in the way the two staff members stopped looking at Diana and started looking at Michael, in the way Daniel squared his shoulders, in the way silence stopped serving Victoria and started interrogating her. Diana felt her own heartbeat pressing against her ribs, steady and hard. She had not slept more than 2 hours. Her mind was bruised from the previous night. Her future stood on the edge of a police report, an arrest record, a public humiliation that would never fully wash off. But she had one thing left. One fragile, dangerous thing. A fact. Michael cleared his throat. There was motion in the east wing around that time. Victoria turned so sharply her robe belt swung. Around that time? Around? Either there was footage or there wasn't. Michael didn't answer her. That, more than anything, made Daniel's face darken. "What aren't you saying?" Daniel asked. Diana held her ground even though every nerve in her body was warning her that the wrong next sentence could destroy her. Because the truth was, she didn't know everything yet. She only knew enough to be certain that she had been set up. She only knew enough to understand that this necklace was not the beginning of her trouble. It was the move someone made because they believed she had already seen too much. And the worst part was, they were right. Victoria folded her arms. "This is absurd. We are standing here debating security angles while a thief stands in front of us." Diana turned toward Daniel. "Mr. Carter, if I took that necklace, why would I hide it in the first place? Security team would search." Victoria laughed once, cold and dismissive. "Criminals are rarely as smart as they think." "No," Diana said softly. "But the people who frame them usually think they are." The words hit harder than she expected. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Victoria's mouth flattened, and Michael, for the first time since the search began, looked directly at Diana with something dangerously close to respect. Nobody in that room understood how much courage it had cost her to say that. Not because she was naturally fearless, but because fear had been an ordinary part of her life for so long that she had learned how to speak through it. Diana had grown up in rooms where rent notices sat on tables like threats. in neighborhoods where women did not have the luxury of breaking down every time the world tried them. She had watched her mother smile through grief because smiling was sometimes cheaper than telling people how bad things really were. She had learned early that panic helped the powerful more than the powerless. So she did not panic. Not now. Not while Victoria Carter's lie was still warm in the air. Daniel extended his hand toward Michael. "Bring me the footage." Victoria turned to her husband. "Daniel?" "Bring it," he repeated. Michael did not move. For one awful second, Diana thought she had gambled and lost. Thought maybe there was no footage left. Thought maybe the backup she suspected had already been erased. Thought maybe whoever entered her room at 2:17 had not made just one mistake, but none at all. Then Michael said, "The main system was scrubbed from one camera angle." Diana saw Victoria's shoulders lower a fraction, almost invisible. But Michael kept speaking. "Not all of them." Now Victoria went still. Daniel stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means somebody accessed the recording. But I keep separate archive copies when something in this house doesn't feel right." A pulse jumped in Victoria's neck. Diana noticed. Of course she noticed, because by then, noticing was the only thing standing between her and destruction. Daniel's face hardened into something she had not yet seen from him. Rage, yes, but focused rage. The kind that no longer asked for explanations politely. "Get it," he said. Victoria stepped in front of Michael. "This is insane. I'm the one who's been robbed." "And if you're right," Daniel said without looking at her, "the footage will prove it." The family friend in the chair stood abruptly. "Maybe I should go." No one answered. Diana kept her hands at her sides so nobody would see how badly they wanted to shake. Michael turned and walked out. And for the first time since the necklace had been lifted from beneath her sweaters, Diana understood that the room was no longer waiting to see whether she would survive. It was waiting to see who else might not. Victoria slowly faced Diana again. The softness was gone now. So was the performative heartbreak. What remained was colder, smarter, more dangerous. For a brief moment, the two women simply looked at each other across the living room. One in silk and diamonds, the other in a pressed uniform and sensible shoes. And if someone had walked in at that instant, knowing nothing about the house, they would have still understood exactly what was happening. This was no longer about jewelry. This was war. Victoria's voice dropped low enough that only Diana and Daniel could hear. "You should have kept your head down." Diana answered just as quietly, "You should have left me out of it." Victoria smiled then, but it was a smile stripped of charm. "You still don't understand what kind of room you're standing in." Diana didn't look away. "Maybe not, but I know what kind of woman I'm looking at." Daniel's eyes moved between them. For the first time, Diana thought he might be seeing his wife and his maid not as roles, but as forces moving around him with histories he didn't understand. Michael returned 3 minutes later with a tablet in one hand and a portable drive in the other. Those 3 minutes felt longer than some years. He stopped near Daniel. "I haven't reviewed the full backup." "Play it," Daniel said. Victoria's voice rose. "Without legal counsel? Without context? Do you even hear yourselves?" Daniel finally turned toward her. The disappointment in his face had deepened into something worse. Suspicion. "If the footage clears this up, then we'll all have context." Victoria held his gaze 1 second too long. Then she stepped aside. Michael tapped the screen. The room gathered around the light. There was hallway footage from the east wing, grainy but clear enough to make out movement near the staff bedrooms. The timestamp glowed at the bottom. 2:16 a.m. A figure entered the frame. Black clothing, hood up, gloved hands. One of the maids gasped, "Oh my lord!" Victoria crossed her arms tighter. Daniel leaned closer. The figure paused outside Diana's door, then entered.
2:17 a.m. Every sound in the room died. Diana felt her stomach twist violently, but she planted her feet harder. Because this was the moment she had been counting on, the moment she had been praying would exist, the moment she had feared might not. The figure remained inside for less than a minute, then emerged, head still lowered, face hidden. Daniel looked at Diana. That proves someone went into your room. Victoria was quick. It proves nothing. For all we know, that was her. Diana almost laughed at the desperation in that sentence. Michael touched the screen. There's another angle. Victoria's color changed. Not much, just enough. And Diana knew. Whatever came next, Victoria had not planned for it. Michael opened a second clip from a side hallway camera farther down the east corridor. Same timestamp. Different angle. The figure reappeared. Walked 3 more steps. Then paused at the sound of someone approaching from the opposite hall. The hood shifted slightly. The screen froze. Michael did not continue. Daniel stared. Who is that? Michael looked at him. I haven't identified the person yet. Victoria immediately said, Then you don't have enough to accuse anyone. Diana looked at the frozen image. Something about the figure bothered her. Not the clothes, not the movement. Something familiar. But she couldn't place it. Daniel stepped closer to the screen. Zoom in. Michael did. The image became grainier. The face was still not clear enough to identify. Victoria exhaled quietly, almost relieved. Diana heard it. And that relief frightened her more than the footage. Because if Victoria was relieved by an unidentified face, then she already knew something Diana did not. Michael shut the tablet. I need time to restore the archive. Daniel stared at him. How long? Until I can verify that nobody has altered the remaining files. Victoria immediately protested. Verify? You're treating my house like a crime scene. Michael looked at her for the first time without lowering his eyes. Right now, Mrs. Carter, it is one. The room went silent again. Daniel turned toward Diana. You're not leaving the property. Victoria looked shocked. Diana looked at him carefully. Am I being detained? No. Daniel paused. I'm saying nobody leaves until I understand what happened. Diana nodded once. She did not trust him. Not yet. But she understood something important. For the first time since the necklace had been found, Daniel was no longer certain that Victoria was telling the truth. And that uncertainty was the first crack in the wall. The audience did not yet know who had entered Diana's room. They did not know what the figure had done. They did not know why Victoria had reacted to the footage. And Diana herself didn't know the most important truth of all. The person who entered her room at 2:17 a.m. had not been looking for the necklace. They had been looking for something else. Something Diana didn't even know she possessed. 3 days earlier. The first thing Diana noticed about the Carter mansion was how carefully it hid its emptiness. It stood behind iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges just outside the city, occupying nearly 4 acres of land. The house was enormous. 12-foot ceilings, marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, a grand staircase. Rooms that looked designed more for photographs than for living. From the street, it looked like success. To Diana, it looked like work. She arrived just after 7 in the morning, carrying a leather handbag with a broken inner zipper and a lunch container wrapped in a grocery bag. Her shoes were polished. Her blouse was simple. Her posture was straight in the way people called proud when it came from someone without money, and professional when it came from someone with it. She had not planned on applying for private domestic work again. Too many stories, too many households where the rules changed depending on who was watching. Too many employers who wanted loyalty without boundaries.
Too many women who expected gratitude for paying wages they had already tried to negotiate downward. But rent did not care about personal preference. Her landlord had grown patient in that mean kind of way where patience was really just the threat of future cruelty. Her mother had passed away months earlier, and the funeral expenses had taken more from Diana's savings than she wanted to admit. The receptionist position she had hoped for downtown had gone to a man whose uncle played golf with the hiring manager. So when the agency called and said a high-profile family wanted mature, discreet household staff, and the pay was better than average, Diana listened. Not because she was impressed, because she was practical. The agency manager, a woman with kind eyes and a bad habit of lowering her voice around wealthy clients as if money might be startled, had warned her on the drive over. The wife can be particular. Diana looked out the passenger window. Particular how? The woman hesitated. She likes things done her way. That answer had told Diana everything and nothing. She stepped out at the service entrance, where another maid named Elena showed her in, and gave her the quick version of how things worked. Daniel Carter liked breakfast in his study if he was home, and in the car if he was not. Victoria preferred staff not speak unless spoken to in common areas. Fresh lilies were delivered every Tuesday and arranged immediately. The upstairs west closet was off limits without specific instruction. Security cameras covered most hallways, but not private bedrooms, bathrooms, or the sunroom. Michael Brooks ran the security team and expected everybody to log unusual deliveries, visitors, or after-hours movement. The cook had seniority, the house manager had authority, and Victoria had moods that required no introduction because the entire house bent around them like weather. Diana listened carefully. That was another thing people often misunderstood about women in her line of work. They thought silence meant emptiness, thought quiet people were somehow less present, less capable, less informed. Diana's silence was never empty. It was storage. By noon on her first day, she knew where the expensive rugs were kept, away from the dogs, during heavy rain. Which cabinet Victoria used to hide candy she pretended she never ate. Which hallway floors creaked. Which staff members were trusted. Which ones were merely tolerated. And which rooms in that giant polished home felt oddly unlived in, despite their perfect staging. She also knew Victoria Carter did not like her. The first sign was not the words. It was the scan. Victoria entered the breakfast room in a cream blouse and gold earrings, coffee in hand, and let her gaze travel over Diana with the kind of polished disapproval some women spent years perfecting. Not just seeing the uniform, measuring the woman inside it, and deciding she had no right to take up so much self-possession. "You're the new one," Victoria said. "Yes, ma'am." "What's your name?" "Diana." Victoria took a slow sip of coffee. "Diana what?" "Warren." Something in Victoria's face flickered, too fast to name. Then it was gone. "Well, Diana Warren, we value excellence here. I don't tolerate gossip, laziness, attitude, or mistakes repeated twice." Diana nodded once. "Understood." Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, as if disappointed that the answer had offered her nothing to push against. Most people, when spoken to like that, did one of two things. They shrank, or they snapped. Diana did neither. It unsettled certain kinds of people more than open defiance ever could. Throughout that first day, Victoria found reasons to correct her even when no correction was needed. The folded towels were a little too tight. The silver tray was slightly off-center. The flowers in the powder room had been angled without understanding the room's lines.